you
Hey,
ready? Are
John.
you ready? Hey,
Hey, John. Of
Nick, I see we've both dressed for the
course,
Conrecki thing.
today's the Canrecchi day. So 31 straight shows through July.
Wow. Well, before we get to our celebration, let's say happy birthday, Joanne Rowling Murray.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Welcome to your Conrecki rebirth and second life. This is, and I think I speak for Nick here. Thank you for the years of challenging storytelling and the consequent community of serious readers who love discussing your work, which has really been an important part of my life. Um, without your stories, I would never have met Nick, and certainly my children's lives. Here's a story for you, Nick. I was talking to my son, Timothy, in California, and I was explaining this project. One of the reasons I didn't go to California for the baptism of his daughter, but and I said, Rowling's turning 60 years old. Here's what it's about. And he goes, Rowling is only 60? And I said, what do you mean? 60's, 60 is quite an age, whatever. And he says, Dad, I cannot remember a time without Harry Potter in my life. And he turned 2 when my family discovered Harry Potter. He says, I think of Rowling as Methuselah. I think of her as like the man on the mountain or something. And I just thought that was so funny. To me, Rowling still looks like she's 35. She looks much younger now than she did when she was in 1997, 98. Those first interviews, she looked like she was in horrible shape. Anyway, thank you, Joe, and happy birthday. Hope you enjoy the show. So what are we doing here, Nick? What are we doing
Okay,
here?
so we are our celebration of the life of J.K. Rowling. All she's done for us is we're celebrating her Canrecchi. So we're both huge Nipponophiles, fans of the culture of Japan, and in Japan, the 60th birthday is a big deal. So they use the Chinese annual calendar. Each year is assigned an astrological animal, 12 astrological animals, and it's also assigned a Chinese element, one of the 5 Chinese elements. So each year is signified by an animal and an element. J.K. Rowling was born in the year of the wood snake. Those 5 elements, 12 animals, that's 60 combinations. We've gone all the way through the calendar, and it's now yet again the year of the wood snake. So for J.K. Rowling, the calendar has come round to the year at which she came into the calendar. So she's lived essentially a full calendar life, and now is the time for her spiritual rebirth, her second life. So
seriously, you take all the experience, all the possibilities of the astrological atmospheres you've passed through, and you're a whole. I mean, you're a WHOLE, not a whole, but you're a whole person. You have some sense of completion, and now you entered the second life as really as having transcended all of those possibilities. And so this is an exciting time. I mean, the Japanese people that I knew, before I went to Japan, I was at a Conrecki celebration in Massachusetts before I joined the Marine Corps. One of the reasons I went to Japan, I wanted to learn more about this kind of culture. And people came from all over the world to celebrate this man's Conrecki. He didn't wear the silly red hat. We're not wearing our red hats today because this is Joe's day to wear the red hat. We're not going to do that. But we have dressed appropriately, I think. I thought of the man. Then I was 24, and I thought 60 was just was really really old. Now 60 years old is in my rearview mirror. That's but anyway, it's an exciting time, and it's an exciting time in Rowling studies. And so we've spent the last month, Nick. This is day 31, of our Conrecki celebration. We've gone through every book that she's written, to include a couple of books that we didn't have in our original list, and we've talked about golden threads. We did one hidden key or tool. We did the ring composition in a fire hose, and we've done a couple of golden threads. We went through the I don't know if we didn't talk about the pregnancy trap golden thread here because we did that so exhaustively in a previous podcast. But yesterday, because people were saying, let's have some more golden threads. That sounds fascinating. And we did do a review of all the golden threads.
Yeah.
But we decided that as our closing thing here, we would talk about the golden thread of the lost child. And really though we didn't do an exhaustive look at lost child, we did a preliminary one. We came up with 28 pretty solid lost children, and the 4 types of lost children that we see in Rowling's work. Excuse me. And then asked ourselves, what's the spring for that? Ed Charlotte was saying, look, if you're talking about the lake, there's various springs. There are key relationships. There are her the books that she's read. There are key events in her life, like education and stuff like that. And then there's the crises in her life, the unresolved issues that she says that trouble her in her subconscious mind, and they show up as story. And this is the lake in the shed metaphor. She talks about her writing process. Nick has that beautiful lake behind him. My goodness, I'm afraid about flooding in Wales here, but
it's been raining.
Swan, no less.
It's been raining in South Wales, so I took a little bit of a hike, and this is one of our nicest lakes. So I thought I'd come and sit in front of this one.
That's wonderful. And how you got that swan to sit so still though while you're doing this? I don't know, but that's. And I'm in the shed because Rowling talks about her inspiration coming through her lake, all those springs in her lake, and her personal life, private life, and then she takes that molten glass like blob that the lake person gives her. Maybe I'll put a link down and we know what the lake person looks like. She's told us what it looks like. And then it comes to the shed, and I'm in my Gare yurt shed here. And she uses her traditional tools. She has her golden threads that she moves through all of her works. And she has her 5 core themes, which incredibly, they're very much like the 5 core beliefs that bubble up through her lake. And that's where she works her intentional artistry. So her stories are not just Mary Sue wish fulfillment fantasies, projected on a screen there, like, boy, I showed that guy I didn't like when I was a kid, Instead, she raises them really to an archetypal thing. She uses her study of mythology. She uses her study of traditional structures. She uses literary alchemy. And really, most of it is about, it's a transformational psychology where you see a person go through stages, you identify with that person, and that identification leads to like an alchemical response. As they go through the stages of alchemical change, you go through those changes. Now, that's in your imagination. It's not really a sacramental transformation, but it fosters that kind of change and turning yourself right side up. I'm always astonished when I read Harry Potter how I always choose to do the right thing, Nick. Yeah. I'm like,
not what's easy.
That's right. I always choose to do the hard right thing, and that change, the identification, is really the magic of her writing. And we see a different sort of psychomachia or depictive psychology in everything she writes. With Christmas Pig, it's about the what they call that, transference with a child and as a mother figure, and in Cormoran Strike, it's the Shakespearean male and female business with soul and spirit. Anyway, this is her real artistry. Forgive me, I spent 25 years in the shed. I'm much more comfortable in the shed. But then Rowling insisted in 2019, and again, 4 or 5 years later, she said, it's really the lake and the shed. To understand my process, you have to understand this stuff is coming from my subconscious, and then I use my intentional artistry to transform that story into something that's challenging. That's engaging and challenging. You can't really understand her work, though, she's saying, until you understand the lake side of it. Well, we've done sort of a shed to lake to shed thing here, where you start off when you're looking at golden threads. This is the 4th generation of Rowling studies. We've got 21 books by her now. Now we're going to start looking at not just the most current book or the one that's coming out soon, but we're looking at the whole spread of her works. The 21 stories with ancillary texts and stuff. And you look at those and you say, okay, what runs through all of her books? the way, I mean, in the Casual Vacancy promotional tour, I think with Rose, she said, I see mortality and morality running as a thread through all of my work. At that point, that was just the 7 Harry Potter novels and Casual Vacancy. But that golden thread runs, that's a theme. That's actually runs through everything she writes. But there are other golden threads that you identify in your shed reading, looking at her artistry and trying to find the things that she puts in every book. Things like Bad Dad. Now Bad Dad doesn't take a lot of work. We know that Rowling was conceived out of wedlock. We know that her illegitimate conception resulted in a real upheaval in her parents' life, real disappointment to her father. And he wanted a boy. He wanted her to be named Simon John, right? And she said he never got over that. He's never gotten over that. And so bad relationships with that. She was scared of his shed, his garage. There's all sorts of things we don't know about that relationship, but we know it wasn't good. And so dads, as she's told Lev Grossman, are really the source of evil in everything that she writes. So when I say shed to lake to shed, what I'm saying is that we look at the work over its entire spectrum. We identify a golden thread, something like Bad Dad, and we say, okay, that's in every work. Oh, there's the lake element that it corresponds to. Is the Bad Dad, is her relationship with her father. Okay. And she chose that. Then you go back to the shed and say, she chose in that to show somebody who in authority that abuses a relationship and causes psychological, damage, which then plays out in the future as, psychopathology or whatever. And so Bad Dad is, it's in everything. She should,
but it's a theme, so you can't look at what a bad dad has done and say, okay, her father did that. You can say it's a theme. So she has problems with her father. That's an unresolved issue, most likely, and that unresolved issue has presented this situation or this character as an inspiration for her work.
Now, the difficulty is when you're looking at these, you see violence against women in her work, and you say, okay, violence against women. Maybe there was something in the shed at her house. And maybe we certainly know there was violence with the Rontes, and maybe there was a boyfriend problem in Manchester. We don't know, but we know that Rowling has experienced violence in her life. She's still PTSD. She's she has this problem, and it's in her work. This is something that she wants to bring up front. Now, is it so traumatic that she's trying to beat a dead horse, or it gets tiresome? No, it's always presented quite credibly.
Yeah.
Career of Evil was, as she said, it was a little close to violence porn, but still, violence against women. There again, you go shed, you identify it, you look in the lake, there it is, and then you see how she's reworked it to that.
Yes.
And then Nick, and there's 14 of those, and most of them are pretty straightforward connections. You say, okay, I can see from my shed work, this goes through everything she writes. I can see a parallel here. For example, you identified, it's not, I wouldn't call it a golden thread, but it's a frequently occurring element or plot point, and that is, a 2-children household that's pretty unhappy on the state of a manor, which is a mirror reflection of her childhood in Tutsill.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it's 2 boys instead of 2 girls. Sometimes it's it can be all sorts of things. Sometimes the mother is absent, like in the Gaunt family, but still you can recognize her childhood home, and this is the kind of foundation thing. Great, but it's done so artfully that you don't flinch at it and say, oh, really? Here we go again. She's beating up her dad, and she's talking about her failing. Instead, you're kind of surprised when someone points it out to you, like, oh, there it is. It's a fascinating thing. So again, you go shed to lake to shed. You get it. But then, Nick, there are those golden threads that, you say, I see it go through everything she writes. Pregnancy Traps was the most obvious one. And you're just like, okay, it could be that, first of all, you have to note them all. You have to identify them all and just be astonished and just say, wow, there's 25 of these things. She's only written 21 books and we got 25 pregnancy traps. That's like Orphans and Dickens. This is such a deal. What is that about? And you speculate about it and you say, well, there is something in the lake there. You could say that pregnancy trap was something that she experienced as a child because her mother may have sprung a pregnancy trap on her father. That's how she became pregnant, and that's how she got married. And I was like, okay, that's credible. Maybe her dad told her it was a pregnancy trap, and that's why he didn't like her. But that's possible. But it's just as credible that Rowling did it herself. That she either did that to Michael X in Manchester, or she did it to Orontes in Porto, or both. And this would be a disturbing thing to her, and because as a feminist, that's kind of a power play. It's kind of a weird power play. That's not a very flattering thing.
In Rowling's work, pregnancy traps, although they are so frequent, they never work. Pregnancy traps never work. They always end badly.
Yeah. So when you go shed to lake here, you're left kind of scratching your head, what is that? We don't know where that could be. We concluded in our survey of these things that you're left with the fact that she probably sprang one on a guy that she was on and off with for 7 years and wanted to get this guy to commit. He's a commitment phobe. Gavin Hughes in Casual Vacancy, right? And she got pregnant and the trap didn't work, or he just said, no, I can't do it. Or she decided he was a jerk and didn't pull out of it. But
I mean, it's possible. It's possible. Obviously, as students of Rowling's writing, we'd like a little bit more to go on. But it fits the timeline. It would fit the unresolved issue, so it's possible.
And here's the thing: if you can't go, this is the point I'm trying to make. Go shed to lake to shed.
Yeah.
If you just go shed to lake and you're left there with your water wings on, saying, "What am I doing here?" I can't get an answer unless Rowling or Michael or Orontes or somebody says, "Oh yeah, that was what happened." We can't get that, or if maybe Peter Rowling will say, "Hey, that's what happened to me. I got trapped here." That you can't go back to the shed from there, because the pregnancy traps, as you said, they're all bad, and it's about power imbalances, certainly, and about a woman's need for commitment to start a family, maybe some biological urgencies there of aging women, but pregnancy trap doesn't really help you that much.
No.
But then there's the golden thread that we started to tug on yesterday. Yeah. Now this one is as prevalent or more prevalent than pregnancy traps, and it takes different shapes and forms. We talked about this. And that's the lost child.
Yeah.
And there's two types of lost children. There's the lost child who's alive, and there's the lost child who's dead. And the lost child who lives can either be a positive child, there's Harry Potter, and it can be, or Cormoran Strike, absent father, itinerant, kind of crazy mother. That's a lost child. And then it can be a lost child who is messed up, dangerously messed up. That's the Dark Lord. That's Thomas Riddle Jr. His mother dies in childbirth in despair and leaves him to an orphanage. He grows up without love, and he's the psychopath of the ages. Then his creed is the Cormoran Strike, bugaboo here, just incestuous rape from a stepfather, just insane. And then the abuse that he suffered because his biological mother quite naturally flees this abusive environment. Then he grows up a nutcase that not only murders women but tortures them, confines them, and just that's so you have lost child who's alive, who's it turns out okay. And then you have, but it never leaves you, as Harry Potter tells Delphine, Diggory, another lost child who lived, who's also in the Voldemort category, lost child who lived, who got messed up. This quality of being an orphan or a lost child never leaves you. And then you have the lost child who dies. And there's two types of those. And the first type of the lost child who dies is the one for whom the caretaker, be it a parent or a half sibling like Lita Lestrange, grieves for that death for the rest of their life, just feels the agony of it. And then you have the lost child whose parents don't grieve about it, who dies, and there is no responsibility for it. And you get a again, I'm not going to redo all of yesterday's show. It was a long show, but we went through the whole thing and then said, so okay, so we've gone shed. Now we want to go to the lake and say, she says there's got to be a spring for this, something that informs everything she writes. Where does that come from? Rowling herself was not a lost child. Now, maybe she had an abusive relationship. Her father was abusive to her, if only mentally, we don't know, emotionally. But would that still inform the work the way it does? I mean, that's you're seeing that just as an extension of bad dad, or it could be the divine mother, the mother who's gone, because Rowling's mother died. She graduated from Exeter. She was on her feet. She was in a long-term relationship. It wasn't really her childhood. She had an experience of her mother as a loving, caretaking person, to that age, almost like Cormoran Strike. But her mother was much more I don't think anybody's drawn the connection between Anne Valant Rowling and Lita Strike.
Yeah.
No. So that's we're in the lake. We're trying to figure that out, and I think the most, especially the grieving caretaker with the dead lost child, and the child who turns out bad, suggests that it's as a possibility that Rowling had an abortion, an induced abortion, not a miscarriage, but an induced abortion that she had misgivings about. And we know from feminists that she admires, like Germaine Greer, that is a school of thought among some feminists, that yes, a woman can't be shackled by nature. She has to have legal access to abortion. But, that liberation from biological necessity, et cetera, biological, imperatives, that freedom comes at a cost. That when you have the procedure, commit prenatal infanticide, however you want to phrase that, and it's always got a rhetorical color to it. You have to look it in the face that you have killed a helpless, defenseless, and innocent person. Camille Paglia just says, look, let's be clear, we got to have abortion, or women are they can't live a fully human life unless they have the capacity to say no to this child. But Paglia says, if you skip biology 101 and you're not willing to acknowledge that fetus is going to become a full human person unless drastic interventions happen and it's extinguished, you're not being honest with yourself. And that the moral high ground belongs to these pro-life people. You may not like them. You may see them as fundamentalists, this, that, and the other thing, but they're right. This is murder, and maybe it's justifiable homicide, justifiable feticide, but it is a murder. Now, that school of feminism, of course, is not the consensus view, but there's hints that Rowling is part of that. I mean, she believes in the immortality of the soul. She's not a conventionally or orthodox Christian, small o, in any sense of the word. She's never said a word to defend Christian women from Islamic, abuse. Not in the UK, not anywhere. Maybe in Iran, but not Christian women. Those are Muslim women. She's never defended Christians. She's always said that she hates the rules and the dogma of the church. She dismisses Christians with any concerns that disagree with her concerns as fundamentalists, which reflect, fundamentalist means Christians who believe things that I don't like. It actually has a very specific meaning in history. It's a sect of Christians in the United States that starts in the 1920s. Rowling's not using the word technically correct, but she is saying, these are Christians I don't like. And she has this standoff position about the church, which is fascinating to those of us who have studied her work and see that it's laden with Christian content, Christian symbolism, Christian transformation. Every time Harry Potter dies in a Harry Potter novel, which is every single book, he dies in the presence of a symbol of Christ and rises from the dead. I mean, that's for somebody that's kind of wiggly about their Christian faith, and she certainly is. That's weird. That's weird. And so Rowling's relationship with the church, which is standoffish, and yet her material, her work is filled with this stuff. And that Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows is largely about Harry's crisis of faith. Dumbledore there standing as the guy with the long white beard on a cloud. That his crisis in faith in Dumbledore is pretty much the great challenge of that book for Harry Potter. He resolves it at Dobby's death in the grave, and he says that I'm not going to pursue Horcruxes. I am going to pursue Horcruxes. I'm not going to pursue Hallows, and that is his essential transformation. He's a believer at that point. Why does Rowling make the climax of her most famous and most popular work a person's crisis in faith? What is that about? And I think, Nick, that comes back to that question we've bantered about back and forth in the moderator back channels at HogwartsProfessor for years now. Is since 2019? Yeah. What is the Lake event that gives us Harry Potter? Well, the best answer that we've come up with, looking at the lost child evidence, is that Rowling had an induced abortion. We're assuming that the father was Michael X, and that she had real misgivings about that. Not so much as a Christian, as a person who believes in the immortality of the soul, more as a psychologist than as a spiritual Christian. And that this was some kind of crisis of faith for her. She did it, we assume, because of her vocation. We've read in her work where she, what is it that Satchel says, the obstacle to success is the pram in the hallway, or fame and glory, or whatever. And Fancourt says women don't become famous authors, largely because they,
women with children don't become famous authors.
Okay. And that Rowling internalized that. Maybe she's talking about how she felt when she decided to, not have this child. But there's a conflict there. And we see these lost children, we see these pregnancy traps, and we think, okay, that would make sense. She sprang a pregnancy trap, consciously or unconsciously. It failed, and she had to make a choice. Do I want to be a single mother who wants to be a writer? What are the odds of my succeeding? And she said, 0, effectively 0. So I'm going to, kill this child, try to save the relationship. Because she doesn't leave Michael until well after her mother dies. But she has that inspiration coming back from Manchester on a train. And this had to have been a subject, I think, of conversation.
And so she says that the idea that came into her head was, boy is a wizard, doesn't know he's a wizard, goes to wizard school.
And she said by the time she got off the train, the story was almost fully formed, meaning that Voldemort and his story was already a part of the story.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, we get Merope Gaunt, We don't meet her, until we're in the pensieve, in Half-Blood Prince. But wow,
Yeah.
this is that's the foundation crime, is the Gaunt's abuse of Merope and her trying to escape that via pregnancy trap, and the child that she has because she has to. In Victorian England, there's no, or I don't know, Edwardian England. Forgive me for not being up on the dates of the Dark Lord's birth and who was king or queen at the time. But that world does not allow for legal abortion, and it probably just anathema to her too. So she has the child, but she dies in despair. And that Dark Lord, that's the genesis point of the Dark Lord, is the woman who couldn't. So his nickname, he who should not be named, is the nickname you would give, or the sobriquet, let's say, of a child who was aborted. You don't name your aborted child. That's kind of sick, right? I mean, you can name a miscarried child, you can name a stillborn child, you can, but or a child that dies in childbirth. But to name an aborted child, that's kind of weird. And Rowling gives that child that name, and it's the shadow of Harry Potter, who's born into. He's the boy who lived. He's the chosen one. He was a subject of choice, deliberate, intentional, marriage and conventional family. Now his mother and his father both die for him. That's how sacrificial and complete their love is for him, that they choose death to protect him, which changes his whole life. He endures the Dursleys who are trying to crush him. And we have this opposition, because at the death, part of the soul of the Dark Lord, who was conceived illegitimately and unwanted by the father, etc., who is not only not saved by a father, he murders his father. This is that kind of anger and rage. And the whole story then is Harry Potter's fight to expel this thing within him. And this is really the only value, because remember, pregnancy traps, we went shed to lake, and there we were. There wasn't any real value in looking at the shed again in the pregnancy traps. Their plot points, as you said, they're all bad.
Yeah.
So we can go back to the lake and say, and Rowling regrets the pregnancy trap that she sprang, or Rowling, but in a way, if she regrets pregnancy traps, and we're saying it came from her own existence, her own conception, was a private pregnancy. That's pretty. She's saying that they never work. And here she is. And that's sort of like Cormoran Strike. He doesn't want to have children because he doesn't want to propagate the mistake that his mother used a pregnancy trap to do this. He shouldn't even exist. And we get Robin's response, which I think is Rowling's response. What is when he says that to her? Doesn't she say that's the most self-serving? What is it's in that great scene in Troubled Blood? Their whiskey-fueled conversation where they admit to be best mates. She cuts him short when he says that about children. That's the sober response. It's how can I say a person born in a pregnancy trap doesn't get to. Now you said no pregnancy traps work. I would say Cormoran Strike worked. He's a heroic figure. So not all of them fail.
The trap was for Rokeby, and that didn't work.
Okay. All right. Okay. The person's good. Okay. But the child who comes out of it can be all right. All right. Yeah. That pregnancy trap thing, you can't get any more shed out of it. What shed artistry do you get out of that? But with Rowling's having had an abortion, okay, if we go lost child to the presumption that points to the fact that there's either a dead child that she laments, or a child that would have been born, and how terrible that would have been, and how much better an abortion would have been, which is, of course, what Agnes, the mother of Dennis Creed, said. I wish he had died. I wish I had killed him. I wish he had been killed at birth. That twofold image of abortion. Now, how does Rowling use that inside her stories? Is it just can you just see the shadow? There's obviously we've been talking about this for 3 years, but there's two ways to do it, I think. And the first way, well, let's do some history first. Okay, when Rowling did this 2019 thing, we were kind of like, how do we deal with that? It upset all my PhD plans. I had to totally revisit the thing. And then we get Christmas.
That's why nobody writes a PhD on a living author, John.
Gosh, it's a moving target.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't one. I mean, that Lake and Shed thing still has been one of. She hasn't done anything like that,
No.
So then we got Christmas Pig and Trouble Blood. But Christmas Pig is where Rowling just opened the floodgates on Lake material. Look at this thing comes from this comes from that, the other thing. She was begging for us to say, oh, I get it. She had a turtle from her mom, and her kid has, a plush pig, and then of course we have the story about Mackenzie Genie and the blue bunny. This was a real Rowling appears in cameo inside the story. I mean, this was yeah, it's Dante-esque and Bunyan parallels. No, I lean a lot more toward Dante than Bunyan, but I mean that still, the whole allegorical elements, especially that we talked about that the Psychomachian scene inside the Power Palace. Where we go through all the qualities of soul and hope and happiness save the day. That allegorical element was just so wonderful. But Rowling was saying, comes from my personal stuff. Don't forget the personal stuff. And sure enough, that invited us to say, oh, well, look, it's a blended family story. This must have been about, basically Jessica and David, and or just Jessica's struggles to find a place. Her mother now has a new family, and where does she work with that? And clearly there were conversations and crises, and they worked it out. But the story has its genesis, clearly in that lake conflict, not just the missing diamond earrings. So Rowling, she gives us the Shed reading of Christmas Pig is intense. If you can just go through all those preliminary things I've written about Christmas Pig, and you can be astonished at the depth and the breadth and the width of that story's artistry. And then we go into the lake and we see that it came out of her own life experience in this split family. Okay. And then you go back to the Shed and you're like, wow, she took that lake element and turned it into that Shed stuff that we talked about. That she took all that Dante and transformation and really wrote the greatest retelling of the Divine Comedy I think ever attempted, especially certainly in a Christmas story, a kid's Christmas story. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer reads Homer. It's just this sort of those, like, whoa.
So I'm just trying to imagine her pitching this as a new author, pitching this to a publisher. So I'm gonna reimagine Dante, right? And I'm gonna call it what? I'm gonna call it Christmas Pig.
And can you see the other guy's face? Like,
yeah.
Okay. And you want an illustrator, and you want a cinema version of this. You want the action figures in a box. Okay. What's the code that they use in the strike office for a nutter in the office?
Oh, it's the Gateshead. I've got yes. Just
mention see the guy
Gateshead to the receptionist on the way out. Yeah.
That's just. I always just calls the receptionist. I'm making an appointment to see Ms. Rowling again here. Do I have that Gateshead appointment? Seriously, magnificent work. I think, as I said before, I think it's going to be the thing. But that's when Rowling said, "Look, I'm serious about this Lake and Shed thing. Is that to really get what I'm after in my Shed, you've got to just see the obvious source of my life." Well, then we look at the package trap, and we're just like, well, the only thing we can come up with is your relationship with Michael, and that doesn't really take us anywhere. Or maybe you do the same thing with Orontes. You got there, and the people that were there said that it wasn't a kiss on the first date. They slipped slept together on their first date, and the people in Portugal were like, English girls are easy, and there was, as they say in soccer, there was no D there. There was she becomes pregnant. She's not married. She has a miscarriage. Then they become engaged. Then they were married, and they have Jessica.
So I think they were engaged prior to the miscarriage. They were engaged prior to the miscarriage, and Rowling on the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling podcast, Rowling mentioned that she sort of assumed after the miscarriage, then the wedding was off.
Okay.
It's the reason why they got engaged.
This is why you're here. So I don't see that. When I humiliate myself, you can say, "Okay, John, let's pull back from that. let's get this correct before it really blows up." We don't know from the pregnancy trap thing.
Yeah.
We can't get the shed artistry about that. But with Rowling's having had an abortion and the lost child theme, now you're going to see, the dimensions of this. The first level of looking at that has to be just, the raw element, that Rowling's going to be working out. Every character almost is going to have some shade of an abortion narrative behind it. And then there's the much more, I think, interesting and a shed aspect, where every book has an abortion narrative apologetic of the sort that we see from Germaine Greer or Camille Paglia, which is that there's something inside of you that is dangerous and threatens your ability to be who you are, and that has to be exteriorized and eliminated. Now, it almost never is a child, but it's something inside the story allegory that makes you really accept it. So that when Harry finally exteriorizes the Horcrux that he is, and the Dark Lord kills it himself, then we all breathe this giant sigh of relief. That this interior aspect of Harry has been exteriorized and destroyed in confrontation with the fact of it. It's really a cognitive behavior therapy exercise. So what I hope to do today on this Conrecki thing is to do the superficial thing first, which is look at Rowling's work and say, specifically Harry Potter. I'm going to really focus on Harry Potter and see how many of these characters are lost children, and how can you see their lives as some kind of transparency as an abortion narrative. Now that's thing. And then I want to go into, I think, the much more interesting shed aspect, where we get an abortion narrative that isn't actually an abortion, isn't an induced abortion of the loss of a child. All right, now obviously this is going to be quite the stretch here for most people. The central thesis of this argument is that Rowling's relationship with boyfriend X, one that lasted 7 years, ended in Rowling's having become pregnant and her mate's refusal to do the right thing as her father had done and marry her. She elected consequently to induce an abortion. She was carrying something the NHS of that time would perform without charge of public shaming. And that's, we'll have to come back to that, right, Nick? Because there's some element there of she could have broken the law potentially. She didn't get a doctor to do it, get a doctor to write off on it. Okay, but anyway, it is this break with her first true love and consequent decision to kill her illegitimate child, something her mother might have done but did not do, that inspired the Hogwarts saga. Okay, that led, on top of her mother's death from MS, to her flight from the UK to a Catholic country in which infanticide was illegal, and that caused her passionate romance with a perfect loser that resulted in an illegitimate pregnancy, miscarriage, marriage, and then Jessica Arante's conception and birth. Rowling's escape with child to Edinburgh, the help she received there from her sister and oldest mate, and her descent into clinical depression were all, in this scenario, consequences of her realizing at least what she had done and feeling profound remorse for her irresponsibility and unconscious behavior. Now that's to put it as harshly as I can possibly put it, okay? Then let's say, like Lori Conti, she dedicated herself thereafter to living as conscious and self-aware a life as possible. Remember, Gloria Conti says, "I've never told a lie since that time." And to elevate her experiences in fiction above their coarse origins, to baptize and redeem them, and to win in that psychological victories over the men, her father, her boyfriend, her husband, who had abused her as they had. Now, the shades of the lake that we're going to see in Harry Potter from that view, okay, if you're looking through that abortion lens, the first thing you're going to see is just, forgive me, fairly obvious things that people may feel I'm forcing pieces here, but if you're looking through that lens, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see the boy who lived is that Lily Potter loved a bad man, Snape, but married one who, though sometimes a jerk, had all the qualities of a heroic husband, one willing to die for her. They conceived the child. He was born into a loving family, and both parents died trying to save their son from his prophesied fate, a sacrificial and selfless love that informed his being and shaped his destiny. The book's origin, though, reflected in the first chapter title, is with the boy who did not live, the unwanted child that Rowling, aborted. She imagined this baby not born as having her own eyes, but looking like his father. His story is the elevation into messianic myth of her wish fulfillment fantasy that boyfriend X, Michael, had been a good man rather than a deadbeat that did not want to accept responsibility for the child they had conceived. In the story, Rowling as Lily dies to save her beloved child rather than being party to his murder, perhaps a shade of her own mother's election to marry Peter Rowling to have had her. Whence Harry and Rowling share a birthday, as well as Harry resembling her father as Rowling does her own father. Then you get Tom Riddle, he who should not be named. He was conceived by a mother that used magic to win a husband. She revealed her secret after their marriage and the conception of a child. The father refused responsibility, having been deceived, and the mother, in her death, abandoned her child to cold institutional care. He becomes a psychopathic killer, unable to love or understand it. His sobriquet, as we said, is of a child who was aborted, never named, and his behaviors and perversion consequent to having been born as an unwanted child is another wish fulfillment exercise. His evil life, one which killed his own mother, in fact destroyed her life, and which was devoid of love, conscience, and the capacity for remorse, justifies Rowling's murder of her own child, conceived perhaps in similar circumstances and with like results with respect to winning a husband's loyalty. As you've said, Nick, they never work out. The guy trapped never really, he gets his, he either wins, he avoids them entirely, or he's abusive. Then we get to the secrets of Dumbledore, the great secret of Albus Dumbledore's life. The foundation of the Hogwarts saga and the Fantastic Beasts film franchise was his illicit relationship with a like-minded friend who turned out to be a murderous monster. Now, his moment of epiphany about his true nature and the degree to which he had succumbed to in his passions to the loss of his principles resulted in the death of a beloved child, right? This Ariana. His simpler younger brother, Albus's mirror image in character and abilities, loved and cared for the child who died, and subsequently conceived an illegitimate child who lived, no little rebuke to the older sibling. Now, that child's death, Ariana, could be traced back to the neglect she experienced from her parents, the violence of the father, and his subsequent disappearance from her life. Dumbledore's, gay liaison is not any kind of apologetic in story for same-sex relationships or attraction. Albus, in his wisdom, becomes asexual and above his sexual desires, an alchemical rebus. As a projection for illicit sex, though, this breaking of a sexual taboo, Albus's experiences of forbidden love, ending in the death of a child for whom he was responsible, works perfectly as a marker for Rowling's 7 years of premarital fornication with Michael, perhaps the template of the Hogwarts 7 years as much as the usual 6 of schoolboy stories, the 7 stages of alchemy, or, Nick, the 7 years of comprehensive education in the UK.
School. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got Harry, we've got Snape, not Snape, we've got the Dark Lord, we've got Albus Dumbledore. You can see the abortion thing sort of hanging over it. The Potions Master is in the set. Severus Snape is the child of an unhappy marriage. If he is the son of Irma Pince, which translated as "I'm a prince," and the squib Argus Filch, as several storylines suggest, Snape is Rowling's projection into the story of herself and her parents' relationship. The artist whose abilities far transcend the magical mother and mundane, pathetic, violent father. Snape's life as a man who is in service to the good, but whom everyone experiences as a self-important sadist, one inspired by his responsibility for the death of his beloved, always, right, reflects Rowling's life in one of two ways, perhaps both. The Potions Master can be read as her wish fulfillment fantasy of how she hoped Michael felt about his betrayal of her and the death of their child. That Michael's life, like her own, was akin to the afterlife of the Bloody Baron, spent in repentance and self-recrimination. The most contradictory character of the book is just as likely, though, to be a self-portrait of the author and her own mixed feelings, simultaneously loving and loathing the child she killed, as Snape does that boy's living representation in Harry Potter. I mean, do you see that? And that Rowling is inside every one of these characters, as she is in Casual Vacancy, and it turns on the induced abortion that she had when Michael was living in Manchester. Then with Ron and Hermione, we get, Rowling openly stated in her Wonderland interview with Emma Watson that Hermione is the story version of herself as a young woman, and that her relationship with Ron was her depiction of her feelings for her good and loyal friend, Sean Harris. He just doesn't mention him, but, that's pretty transparent. She told Watson that she lamented writing this into the novels, ill-matched as Ron and Hermione were, elevating alchemical symbolism aside. Her disparaging comments to Cruz about writing stories to satisfy psychological needs confirm the reasoning behind her regrets. Why Harry really cannot marry Hermione or get along with Snape, though, is perhaps because, as the story figure of her aborted child, Harry could not meet at that level with representations of the author, in Hermione, either as a comprehensive student or as a repentant killer. Then we get the bad dads, Nick, that golden thread of bad dads. Now here we have Simon John, the Rowling's, male self, and her Oedipal rage showing itself in the death of every father figure in Harry's life other than Arthur Weasley. And remember, Arthur Weasley only received a last-minute reprieve when Rowling realized what she was doing. As it is the boy who lived in the guise of he who must not be named serpent or phallus symbol that all but kills the Weasley paterfamilias. The poetic monster living in Rowling's lake, her muse and resident fantastic beast, blames Peter Rowling for not loving her properly as a child, which neglect and disapproval were the engine of her own mirrored relationships with men. That's what she told Oprah, is that she basically married Orontes because she hadn't resolved her own bad relationship with her father. Okay, which leads to the illegitimate conception of a child, her own act. That was also true of Michael, not just Orontes. And so her relationship with Michael led to the illegitimate conception of a child, her own act of the ultimate disapproval, and expression of not wanting a child, which is killing the baby. Now, I've really focused on Harry Potter because I think we're so close. That's Rowling's really first published work. Yeah. Casual Vacancy is a pretty clear transparency to her life. I think that was conceived first. But we still see, if abortion is the lake spring that gives us Harry Potter, we can see in every one of the major characters. And the death of all the bad dads, we can see Rowling, dealing with that induced abortion that she had. Now, again, I'm not saying this is how you have to see the book. I'm saying if you look through this lost child golden thread lens that reflects an abortion in the lake, the baby in the lake, let's say, that means that you're going to see that every character has that shade. Now, it's also true in Cormoran Strike. She's much more in control of her inner Nagini in her Strike novels, but shades of her conflicted beliefs and feelings about an aborted child abound still in these books, these mysteries, especially in Troubled Blood, a book that's all about children, birthdays, conceptions and abortions, or babies not aborted who should have been killed, Dennis Creed. As Rowling's induced abortion remains the central event of her life, perhaps, one known only to her closest friends and family, it should come as no surprise that the Strike series parallels the Hogwarts saga in the many ways that it does, the so-called parallel series ideas. It's inspired by the same muse monster in the depths of her lake. Now, I'm not going to go through all the Corman Strike stuff. That's a lot of stuff, right? But I'm saying that that's the easy work, is to just go through there and say, okay, if I look at this through the abortion lens, how do these characters suggest that Rowling is giving them her message that she wants you to see about this spring in her lake? Much more interesting and much more like a shed thing, because that's projection fantasy.
Yeah,
that's working out your own issues and story and just putting them up on a big screen. And that's pretty mechanical, having to go through and just look at those things. What takes more subtlety is and more appreciation of her artistry is seeing that after because she spent 5 years planning these things, and she was going through CBT exercises. There's no way she wasn't aware that this was some sense what she was doing. I think it's one reason why she never wanted to talk about the religious elements in the books while they were coming out, and she never wanted to talk about her faith, and she felt real bitterness about these fundamentalists that were attacking her work as this way. Was she knew what the foundation of it was. Now, the evidence that she knew what she was doing is in the shed reading of this thing, still looking through the abortion lens, but saying, how does she present it very subtly in the action of the story? How do we get an abortion apologetic that Camille Paley and Germaine Greer would be nodding their head about? It's necessary, but it's not painless, and it's not moral. You've lost your moral high ground when you induce an abortion. Now, this second looking at this narrative is the abortion apologetics. Every novel includes something interior that needs to be exteriorized and eliminated, which is a good thing. All right. Now, the test of this thing is to use this abortion lens to read and understand the Harry Potter series. Doing this reveals that each of the 7 books includes an abortion event in which something interior to a character is exteriorized, revealed as evil, and destroyed or otherwise eliminated. Each Hogwarts saga installment, in addition to being an edifying novel of psycho-spiritual transformation, that's really Rowling's hallmark. That's really her shed, point and pinnacle, has an embedded apologetic argument for abortion. It's what Ed Charlotte calls the grain of sand in the oyster that gives you the pearl. All right. Now, I'm going to very briefly review 7 arguments in story form that we get in the Harry Potter story. First, there's Philosopher's Stone. There we see Quirrell de Mort in mirror image reflecting Horcrux Harry, and he expels the Dark Lord from reverse image pregnancy of Quirrell. Right. Remember, Quirrell de Mort is Quirinus Quirrell with the back of his head is the Dark Lord. There's something interior to Quirrell that has to be expelled. And that expelling of that, because of Harry's touch and the love of his mother, kills the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher rather than the evil wizard. This is the opposite of the Deathly Hallows finish, in which the Soul Scar is killed by Harry's sacrificial death for his friends, a death meant to kill the Dark Lord's scar Horcrux within him. Right? But we see that expelling of what's interior, that the hidden under the turban Dark Lord, in that. He doesn't kill the Dark Lord, obviously. He kills Quirrell, but it's expelled and it's eliminated. It goes off back to the Romanian forest.
Okay, I can see that one. I'm keeping up with you, John. 1.
Score 1. Chamber of Secrets. Okay. Now this one, you got Ginny acts as Quirrell here. She's possessed by this predator spirit that makes her do things that she can't otherwise would never do. Right. And Harry, doing his saving people thing, goes deep into his subconscious mind, miles beneath Hogwarts, really shoots my representation of phallic and yontic imagery there. And he rescues the girl possessed by this predator spirit and kills the monster within the book, right? He destroys that predator spirit, at least his vehicle, right? He kills the Horcrux. So once again, we have this thing inside. It's the girl, possessed by the spirit, or the book that has the monster inside of it. And Harry performs an induced abortion. He exteriorizes it and eliminates that threat.
Okay, you're 2-0 up, and it's not even half time yet.
And everybody celebrates. Remember, when this happens, Hogwarts rejoices. We celebrate. Harry's running the gauntlet of the objects and saving the Philosopher's Stone. And what's his name? Our famous alchemist. He elects to die rather than to live forever. And the stone is destroyed. The stone inside the mirror, which is another image like that. Okay. Prisoner of Azkaban.
Okay.
Best friend's pet is a beloved rat that is revealed as the man responsible for the death of Harry's family. Now, Harry doesn't kill the rat man when a person that, because that would be murder, but he has second thoughts when the pet escapes. But when you see this evil that's interior, it's become a faithful member of a family that's just part of their way of life. Scabbers is a good thing, and it couldn't be more embedded in the life of Gryffindor House. And all of a sudden, it's exteriorized and shown to be this horrible, person that was most responsible for the death of the Potters in Godric's Hollow. Harry, his father's friends, the Marauders, want to murder Wormtail, but they don't, because they're stopped by Harry. That would be murder. Let's just imprison him and put him off to the side. Basically, it's an abortion without murder, but he regrets it. Right? He's like, oh no, I should have done it. Right? Again, there's your embedded induced abortion. Is that this thing which isn't what you thought it was? You thought it was a good thing, but it's exteriorized as an evil, and it's that big a part of your life. What do? Well, all the right-thinking people in the stories want to kill him because it's destroyed his life. But no, we don't do that. That, of course, has a payoff, as Dumbledore says.
Okay, there's a referee's decision on this one, and you've got it on points. Okay, so
I can see that's a close one. The Goblet of Fire makes up for that, Nick. The Goblet of Fire makes up for that. Okay, the 3 Triwizard Tournament tasks all have abortion feticide elements. All right, the champions have to steal an egg from its dragon mother. Okay, that's interspecies infanticide. The reason the mother is going berserk is it wants to protect its own child. Oh no, the champ, everyone's cheering for this egg to be stolen. Come on. The next one, there's 2 for the next one. Harry learns the second task by putting the egg underwater in the presence of a child murder victim. Moaning Myrtle is there while Harry puts the egg underwater and opens it up. It definitely has a uterine image there, and the fact that there's a child murder victim cheering him on and showing him how to do it, a lot of shades there. But the big deal about the second tournament task is the champions have to rescue loved ones who are tied up underwater. Okay, which is another fetus womb image. And Harry fails because he's horrified by the possibility that anyone will die if not rescued. A false understanding, though a reflection of good character. He takes the high moral ground. Now, nobody else is like, you should have let him die. You should have let him die. That's the message that the world is preaching. And Harry is conflicted about it. He feels stupid that he didn't let them die underwater. And the third task, of course, Harry prays, let it die, when the Dark Lord in fetal form is returned to the Cauldron womb and rises as a fully grown man bent on murdering him. That's not a points decision, Nick. That's one of the big wows of this thing here. Okay, I'll give you a week on Wormtail, but man, okay. Order of the Phoenix, the big blue book. Harry the Horcrux is possessed by the Dark Lord. But Harry expels him with love and the grief he feels for Sirius and his friends. Psychopathic Voldemort, the unnatural product of coercive love. I remember Rowling has said, and I'm sure you can quote this, Nick, because you remember this so well. Rowling said that the Dark Lord was the product of coercive love, and she's, I can't imagine a worse thing to be born in.
Yes.
Okay, and so, and that made everybody kind of flinch at that. It was such a statement that essentially the Dark Lord should have been killed because he was the product of coercive love. And she backpedaled a little bit on that, but
yeah,
I tell you, that I think reflected her true position. So the Dark Lord, this coercive love child, fights Dumbledore, the wise man who cannot vanquish his foe because he doesn't know if he himself murdered his sister Ariana or not. Confusion about whether death of dependent is really murder per feminist. Now, it is love that empowers Harry to abort the evil within him when the Dark Lord takes over. This was a plan on the Dark Lord's thing to tempt Albus into murdering Harry in order to kill him, right? So the Dark Lord becomes this thing within that has to be exteriorized or eliminated, and that's what Harry does through his love and remorse, his grief for Sirius. Dumbledore can't kill him because Dumbledore feels he's already killed a child, and here he is seeing this thing. I think Dumbledore was right. He couldn't have killed the Dark Lord even if he had killed Harry. But the temptation was, kill them both. Finally kill that coercive love product. Now I like that one because it really has Harry as being pregnant. That Harry is filled with this, and it's agony to him that he feels pain he never felt before because it's so unnatural and unwanted to him. And then he thinks about his life, his friends. And that expels this living thing inside of him. And it's a good thing. All right. That it's your care for yourself and your care for others that allows you to eliminate this thing which has possessed you and that you don't want. What do the judges say, Nick?
That's a clear win. That's a clear win. Okay. No arguments from the judges. Okay.
Half-Blood Prince. Harry travels with Dumbledore beneath the mountain to a hidden lake. Again, there's a lot of Freudian imagery here, okay, about the mountain and the lake inside of it. And this hidden lake, they call it Lake and Fairy in fandom, right? Is filled with the dead, which is, forgive me, a fetal depository of sorts. And the headmaster, while he's there, re-experiences the night he killed or didn't kill the child he was supposed to protect and care for. He re-experiences his abortion narrative. All right. Was it the right thing? Was it the wrong thing? Did he do it? Was he really responsible? That Albus goes through his abortion nightmare right there, drinking the secret sauce out of the lake. Now, Harry tries to help him when Dumbledore collapses, but he's dragged by the living dead into the lake. Whoops, Only Albus's recovery and decision to save the boy who lived prevents a second child dependent's death on Albus's watch. A child then almost kills Dumbledore in the tower, but Dumbledore kills himself via a proxy agent to save the conflicted boy. Right? Really, the Half-Blood Prince finish is all about the agony of Dumbledore and his core conflict. The big spring in his lake is about Ariana's death and his responsibility for it. He saves Harry and then protects Draco in the finish to show that he had done the right thing there. And all of that, again, inside this fetal and womb symbolism of that situation. That and the blood being spilt in a line or whatever on the wall. I mean, I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version here, Nick. All right, but still, Half-Blood Prince, because of that key scene, which symbolically is much bigger than the Astronomy Tower scene, I think.
Yeah.
And then you get to Deathly Hallows, and there we have the scene that Rowling waited 17 years to write. She has dead Harry meeting with Dumbledore, and the fetal remains of Voldemort. Okay.
So you have to forgive me, but I've been polluted by the film. So in the film, it is clearly fetal. How is it described in the book?
Just a mass of flesh.
Okay.
Yeah, it could, in a way, it could be a pile of hamburger, but there's something about it that unnerves both Harry and Dumbledore. But Dumbledore says there's nothing you can do to do this. In the books, it's not described as fetal. And in the films, you get that image pretty strongly. But I think that's, as the executive producer of that film, I don't think that could have been done without Rowling's permission. Right? That's too important a scene for her to say, "Oh yeah, just do whatever you want down there. Use some Play-Doh."
I'm gonna say that's plausible. Obviously, for the last two films, she'd stopped writing Harry Potter. She'd completed it. We know she was on the film set a lot more frequently. She was almost entirely absent from the early films, but we know she was more involved in the latter ones.
All right, so Harry has, at this point at King's Cross, there's three people there, right? There's this soul fragment mess on the floor over there, and there's Dumbledore, who's luminescent, literally just radiating light. In Christian symbolism, it's the light of the world. He's become one with this logos that comes in the world and every man. Now that Harry's there, and suddenly his vision is transformed. Harry doesn't have glasses on. He sees perfectly. Dumbledore tellingly is still wearing glasses. Now that, and everything that Harry wants, he gets. He wants robes, bang, he's clothed. And he knows everything. 17 times in that chapter, Dumbledore says something like, "As you know, Harry." Well, Harry's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I mean, that's really. I mean, Harry all of a sudden knows everything. The only thing he doesn't know that he wants to know, but decides he doesn't need to know, is whether Dumbledore killed his younger sister. Right now, Harry at that point, to arrive there, he has expelled the Dark Lord's Horcrux scar fragment. Okay, which is his terminal pregnancy. All right, and how has he done it? He's done it via sacrificial, unconditional, selfless love. And now he can safely confront his already vanquished shadow self, right? He's committed an induced abortion committed by this shadow self abortion figure, right? The headmaster in that place confesses his Ariana nightmare and allows that Harry is the much better man because of his intentional abortion in the Forbidden Forest. I mean, okay, so that, Nick, to me, that's a value. When you look at the shed and you identify the golden thread of the lost children, and then you look in the lake and it's a mystery, what could that be? And you see, well, she's talked about abortion, she's for abortion, but she's not really beating a drum for abortion. As you said, she's only saying that it should be legal and safe. She doesn't say, everybody go out and get one. That lines up with Germaine Greer, who's one of the few feminists that she's mentioned as being really influential, and her take on this. And certainly with Camille Paglia as well. That tells us that, okay, let's assume that is that spring in her thing. What do we find? Well, we find first the mechanical interpretation things. And then we see the much more sophisticated shed items, which is that Rowling embeds an abortion inside every story in which something evil interior has to be exteriorized, it has to be expelled, and then it has to be eliminated or dismissed. Now that's a wow. That's a wow, because then you can see how each one of these stories includes this abortion narrative according to Germaine Greer. That this thing has to be expelled for Harry to be a free and a living person. It's not painless, and it comes at a cost, but in the end, it's a good thing. It's definitely an end justifies the means type thing. All of them, except for maybe, a Prisoner of Azkaban, all of them have that really embedded narrative inside of it. So look at it from this perspective through the lens. The Hogwarts saga is in essence her own story. She's simultaneously Merope Gaunt and Harry Potter. He who shall not be named is the child that Rowling aborted if it had lived, or the way it haunts her post-mortem. The boy who lived is in turn the author who lived, which explains the transparency of the fiction life parallels between Harry and Joanne, most notably their miserable childhood, the shared birthday, and the magical power that the family adults did their best to squash out of the unwanted child. Rowling, majored in French because she didn't want her parents to know that she was going to be a writer. It had to be something useful, all right? The Harry Potter novels, from this perspective, are simultaneously and incredibly, I think, a Christian allegory of repentance, negretto, purification, albedo, and spiritual perfection and sacrificial love, the rebetto, while also serving and simultaneously serving as Rowling's repeated apologetic for her decision to kill the child, Manchester Mike, and she decided they did not want. Okay? Because that 2007 Bloomsbury chat, the enchantment under which Tom Riddle fathered Voldemort is important because it shows coercion, and there can't be many more prejudicial ways to enter the world than as the result of such a union. Right? If that's Rowling's perspective, that seems to me to confirm that coercive love, which is that another way of saying pregnancy trap?
I mean, that would fit, wouldn't it? That would
fit. It's all right to induce an abortion to get rid of that. Okay.
That's a troubling thought, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, that's Harry Potter.
Yeah.
But every Cormoran Strike novel too starts off with a lost child. A lost child who brings a case to the agency. All right. And it begins with Cormoran Strike's breakup with Charlotte, which is a breakup about her lost child, and the deceit and the elimination involved there. Okay. There's really only, how many possibilities are there for how how Charlotte lost that baby? Either, she miscarried, either she made the whole thing up, or she had an abortion. Is there anything else, Nick?
No.
No. And I don't think the miscarriage or make it up is credible. Charlotte holds on to that really up right to her death, that there was a baby. And so here you have the lost child, Cormoran Strike, having to confront this whole scenario and the lies involved with it, and he can't stand it because he's a lost child. Now, posit Strike as this lost child of a pregnancy trap. He has no father. His mother dies, just as he leaves their squat home, and her mother also is a victim of a pregnancy trap, right? We get Jeffrey Whittaker doing that. But every Strike case begins with a lost child. The first book, it's John Bristow. He's a mess. He's a basket case. He's an adopted child whose mother never really liked him, much preferred Charlie and Lula to John. And he comes in, it's upside down land. He wants to have Strike find him as a murderer, and Strike does that. The next one is Leonora Quine. Now, she's not a lost child herself, but she's really speaking for Orlando, who is a lost child, is absolute dependent, and she has a bad dad. And she basically wants Strike to bring bad dad to justice, or bring him to heel. And Strike finds him instead, and bad dad has been eliminated. So then we go to Career of Evil, and who comes into the office, Nick?
So we get a leg initially into the office.
That's yeah. Career of Evil. Gosh, Nick, we did this before. It just snapped right up here. I guess Career of Evil is Donnie Lang.
Yeah.
He appears in the office via this. He drives up to the office on his motorcycle.
Yeah.
And drops off a leg.
Yeah.
Here I am, baby. I've come to avenge my lost child that you killed, Strike. That's Donnie Lang is the ultimate in a child that maybe should have been killed because he was illegitimately conceived and his father hated him and his mother rejected him. He's a messed up kid. He's a Dennis Creed and a Dark Lord figure. Then we go to Lethal Light, and Billy Knight comes roaring in here, Nick. This Gateshead nutter comes flying in, and what do you do with Billy Knight? You try to find him. You try to find the lost child. You try to figure out what he was talking about and help him. And by the end of the story, he's become, not fully human, but he's in recovery. He's regained his childhood from Jack of Kent and the buried horse figure, which he thought was what, Nick?
Thought it was a child.
It was a buried child. That's what he brings to the office as the crime. There's a baby buried in this hollow. That's probably the strongest lost child with abortion overtones in the books. Then we get to, again, my favorite Corman Strike novel, Troubled Blood, and the foundation crime there is Luca Ricci, compelling Gloria Conti, a helpless woman who's caught in some sort of fandom fantasy about the Godfather. To date, this guy whose name means basically the satanic devil, the light carrier, the Lucifer Dick, Luca Ricci. Anyway, that's the foundation crime. Is the abuse of that young woman. But she has an induced abortion with Margot Bamborough's help. Now, in 1974, Nick, the UK law on abortion is different than it is today, or even when it was when Rowling was with Michael X.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
So that early on in legal UK clinic-based abortions is you had to have a referral to the clinic from your doctor. That would normally be your GP. And there was nothing to compel the GP to make that referral. So if your GP did not believe in abortions for moral, religious, or other reasons, then
especially for an abortion which is entirely by choice, there's no real danger to the mother.
So if there was a medical reason, then the GP would be compelled to refer you to somebody who could treat your medical condition.
Which is exactly what Margot Bamborough should have done for Theodosia Loveridge.
Yeah, she said that she needed to go to A&E, which is sort of the UK version of the ER room. So you go to emergency. So this isn't a case of I will refer you to this doctor. You need to go to emergency, and they will deal with you straight away. But
okay, so what's the difference between that and the time when Rowling is going back and forth to Manchester with Michael?
Okay, so it was much more liberal then. Still, you can't, I don't think, compel a GP to refer someone to an abortion clinic, but you don't need that initial referral anymore. So you can make your own appointment at a family planning clinic to get an abortion. One way around it in the early days, when you still needed a GP referral, is that there were things like charitable clinics like Mary Stopes, who could make that referral for you, or could refer you to a GP that would make that referral. But yeah, it was in those days it was not so simple. They talk about it a little bit in the clinic. So the old doctor, and I can't remember his name, but he was against making referrals to family planning clinics.
Okay, so here's my question, and correct me if I'm wrong here as I go along here.
Yeah.
Abortion feticide in the UK was and remains a crime if the procedure is done without a consultation with a certified physician that concludes with paperwork that the death of the unborn child is necessary. Now that can be
Yes. You need to be essentially it needs to be prescribed by a physician. So either a referral for a surgical procedure by a doctor, or prescription of a drug by a doctor. But still, right now, it has to be applied by a certified doctor. So you cannot induce an abortion yourself, and if you're not certified, you cannot induce an abortion to somebody else. In order for a doctor to do it, then there has to be a reason for doing it, but that reason can be relatively trivial. So it could be mental health, it could be circumstances, but it's not the case that a, a, a doctor would be compelled to to do this for no reason, but the reason can be relatively trivial. Now, right now, there's legislation going through to decriminalize it, essentially, and it's a little bit of a difficult thing because what nobody wants is backstreet abortions. But yeah, there's some steps going through Parliament now to stop it being illegal.
My question here is, and we're going a little off subject here, but
Yeah,
is that Rowling's hesitance to speak out about it. I mean, Rowling is a proponent of legal, safe abortion.
yeah,
She's not an advocate for abortion.
no.
But she has never spoken about her own history in this respect. And why not? I mean, if she was saying this is a blameless, proper procedure, then maybe she could drop that bomb as a feminist and say, I've had an abortion, but she hasn't. Now, could it be not only is she trying to protect Michael X and his right to privacy, could she also be thinking of the medical doctor who signed off on what seems to have been a purely elective procedure, in effect, an unnecessary death?
So no, I don't find that credible.
Okay.
But also, I think not credible, but more likely. So as I say, the reasons can be so trivial that it would be almost impossible to prosecute or even criticize a doctor for unnecessary abortion.
Okay.
It would still be illegal if she had done something physical or taken a drug to induce an abortion in herself. That would have been illegal.
That's fascinating.
I still don't think it would be credible just because the arranging an abortion in that time period would have been relatively easy, and given she's an intelligent woman, she would have known the risks, the health risks of trying to do this yourself.
So if the Gloria Conti story is, it can't be in any way a precise point-to-point thing because it's 74 versus the 90s. But it might just mean that she had somebody advise her on how to do this and take care of her to get through the process. Okay. I'm going to say that the Strike series is in, as we have it so far. Okay, we only have 7. Is so far is in parallel with the 7 Potter numbers. That it was inspired primarily by Rowling's feminist beliefs rather than her spiritual, not religious, nominative Anglicanism, really her esoteric Christianity. The infanticide story that's embedded at the base of Troubled Blood Mysteries shows she is still working on getting over the Manchester Mike lost child. And there's that comment about my 28-year-old self that she made on Twitter, maybe there was another one. The Shakespearean psychomachia of the second series suggests strongly that the core unresolved issue that inspired Strike was less, the baby in the lake than marital stress around sex and gender role issues, which is to say how she and her husband worked through that struggle is reflected in their sex is real defiant stand contra the transgenderism tsunami. Okay. Now, what's great about this, Nick, is not only do you get, a perspective on the books, which is new and interesting, and with Harry Potter, you get that whole embedded abortion apologetic. That's a fascinating new aspect to the books. But now we get, if you postulate that she had an abortion and we're left with that, now we find out that why she doesn't like the institution aspect and the rules of Christianity. Her crisis of faith that we get in Deathly Hallows was that she knew the church as her protection from abuse, because Church Cottage is literally abuts the Church of English Parish and Sanctuary in Tutshill. And Christian faith, in fiction at least, is the great allegory of personal transformation that she experienced imaginatively, if not sacramentally. But prenatal infanticide, she recognized that put her outside the boundaries of church life, because she did not regret or repent that murder. She didn't celebrate it, but she believed it was necessary and therefore justified. Whence her repeated bitter comments about the bigotry of, quote, fundamentalists, including those she specifies of my own faith. Second, explains again why she never tweets anything about Islamicist crimes in the UK or crimes committed anywhere against Christian believers. Okay, and then we have her inability to acknowledge that C.S. Lewis remains the most profound influence on her work. From the 7-story series with an obvious double helping from the menageries of Christian symbolism in Potter, to the Psyche and Cupid backdrop, to the Strike series in A La Till We Have Faces, as well as the Dante regional structure of Christmas Pig, which C.S. Lewis did in The Great Divorce. All those things, C.S. Lewis dwarfs Austen and company for depth of influence on Rowling. But Rowling, qua feminist, is not going to risk her NOW credential by expressing admiration and gratitude to a supposedly Christian misogynist who would certainly find her Pegelian views on abortion abhorrent. Then I think too that this is the reason that Rowling refuses to speak about her personal history, that she refuses to sit down with anybody, a biographer, a Potter pundit, or a serious striker, really. She won't talk about the Cinderella Horatia Alger mythology and the nightmare of her first marriage. Okay, she points to the lake inspiration of her work, but will not do interviews in which hard questions will be asked, the answers to which will forever color the interpretation of an experience of her work, as Dickens's time in the shoe polish factory informs all Dickens scholarship. Now, that's to say, I think Rowling studies, beginning today, the Conrecki, is about to enter a very controversial period. I don't think she's going to really appreciate our airing these speculations about her past, but so be it. All this would be much easier if there was a living journalist in the United Kingdom who would find Chester Mike through her Exeter friends and doorstep him. He has his right to privacy, certainly, as does Rowling, even if she called for the Lake interpretation of her work. But history is going to out Michael eventually. So I would urge him to frame the issue as he'd like to do it. What next? I think this is really up for Rowling or Michael to confirm or deny. If confirmed, Rowling's study is stood on its head, right? This is not only just the edifying tale of psychological spiritual transformation, it's also Rowling's interior abortion apologetic. If denied, then we have still, foregrounded this standing mystery of the pregnancy trap and lost child golden threads. What's the spring for that, if not Rowling springing a pregnancy trap and inducing an abortion of that and the lost child? And that's my gift to Jo on her Conrecki, that she can be open now about her life, and we could move into the critical biographical period of her life and work. I'm not sure that's maybe she'd prefer that hat. Maybe she'd prefer my make 60 great again hat.
Let us know, Jo. The comments are open on this post. Subscribe. I mean, this has been challenging, troubling, and when we've talked, this has also been scary. I said yesterday that what's going to elevate this above prurient gossip is going to be the so whats that largely you were talking about today. So what does this mean in terms of how we look at her work? Because we are not, as much as I'm the Lake guy, we are not students of Rowling's life. We are students of her literature. Does this help to illuminate what we're reading? Does it make it a richer experience? Do we appreciate her artistry more? And I think that's true. But what I'd really like, again, the comments are open, is what do you guys think? Are we just name calling, or are we doing something here that is useful, that is building on our understanding of Rowling's work? So please let us know.
Yeah, again, the pregnancy trap work that we did, which is first-rate work, frankly, if I say so myself, that it doesn't take us anywhere.
No.
You know, we just wind up in the lake and like, well, we're never going to know. Okay. But when you talk about the lost child golden thread, and it takes you to a grieving author who is still somehow conflicted still about that induced abortion, and about how that's an interior conflict, which is it's still a live wire, still running through her work. And then you take that lake possibility and use it as a lens to look at her work, you know, basically shed analysis, try to understand her artistry and meaning, what she's trying to put across, just as she invites you to do in The Silkworm when they talk about Owen Quine's work. You know, why do we have these tropes and these themes that continue to run through her work? It's an issue that she feels that people don't understand yet. That would be this thing about, you know, women and pregnancy, which I know the TWAW people aren't going to like this, but, you know, the possibility of pregnancy is a defining feature of being a woman.
Yeah.
And that as a qua feminist, it's has its central place. As a woman artist, she foregrounds it. It's right up in front. So that's my argument, is that clearly is that it has a valuable, it serves a valuable function inside shed analysis of her work. It shouldn't, but it may very well, it shouldn't diminish all the other shed work that we've done. This doesn't make the Christian symbolism disappear. This doesn't make that the psychomachia and the artistry of the structure, that doesn't go away when you understand that the germ or the grain of sand inside that oyster that it gives us the pearl of Rowling's work was this tragic induced abortion with Michael X.
Okay, so happy birthday, J.K. Rowling. Please keep an eye on the channel. I think we're going to probably have a relatively short period of reflection.
2 or 3 years, Nick.
But yes, we will let you know what's happening next.
We both have to reintroduce ourselves to our spouses.
Yeah.
And, happy birthday to JKR, M, and to the fandoms, to the serious readers that have coalesced as a real dynamic community around discussion of these works and their meaning. It's been a real uplifting part of my life, and I'm grateful to Rowling for existing, and I'm grateful to all the people that I've met consequent to reading her books seriously.
Yes. Thank you, J.K. Rowling. Thank you, John. And to paraphrase the dedication of Deathly Hallows, thank you for all of you who've stayed with us right till the end. Cheerio, John.
Right.